It began, as these things often do, with an unopened box. It had sat in the basement of the Sunland Estate auction house in eastern Maryland since at least 1983. No catalog entry, no provenance, no note of arrival, just a plain archival container. Gray, thick, with nylon straps and one torn shipping label, whose ink had long since bled into illegibility. No one remembered receiving it. No one noticed it until March 14, 2022. That morning, a junior cataloger named Helen Trask, 34 years old, no known criminal history, no record of prior mental illness, was performing inventory ahead of an estate liquidation when she opened the box. Surveillance footage from the facility shows her lifting the lid at 10:21 a.m. She does not move again until 11:07, when a supervisor found her standing in place, motionless, with dried vomit on her collar and by the box open before her. Inside, a thick leather portfolio, a sealed envelope labeled "Property of the Executive Branch," and 17 black and white photographs. Every image featured the same figure, President Richard Milhouse Nixon, captured in settings that were familiar, yet not quite right. The furniture matched, the suits were correct, the expression was not. She was placed on psychiatric hold within the hour. When later asked what she saw, Trask reportedly said, his eyes were facing the wrong way. The photographs were impounded. Chain of custody was documented, at least initially, by the Maryland State Historical Archive. But 3 days later, the case was transferred quietly to federal oversight, and all local documentation was expunged. The internal memo reads simply, "Sensitive federal materials, national security relevance, do not duplicate." Of course, copies had already been made. One had been emailed by Trask to a friend at the Washington Free Ledger the night before she was hospitalized. Another was found printed out in the bathroom stall of the auction house, torn neatly into thirds. These fragments, along with one full print discovered by a Reddit user on March 19th, became the nucleus of an informal investigation that would span 2 years, 3 continents, and ultimately 14 unexplained deaths. This is where our story begins, not with Nixon himself, not even with the photographers, but with a single photo, one email, and a question no one could quite answer. What was he looking at? The original 17 images are now largely gone. Some were confiscated, some were stolen. 2 are missing, 1 was burned. But fragments remain, both physical and digital. We've reconstructed the sequence using those pieces, forensic scans, eyewitness accounts, and original negatives briefly held in a state archive in Stuttgart before vanishing in September 2023. There is enough to piece together a narrative. Photo 1 is undated. It shows Nixon seated behind the Resolute desk, but the lighting is wrong. Harsh overhead fluorescence, not natural light. The carpet is not the Oval Office's, but a dense geometric pattern of triangles, dark and spiraling inward toward the chair's legs. Nixon's hands are folded on the desk. The fingers appear wrong, elongated or blurred, or somehow not matching the shape of the hand they emerge from. The shadows beneath the desk do not match the angle of the lighting above. The face is calm, almost relaxed, but the eyes, they are slightly widened. And as Trask noted, they appear to gaze not at the camera, not at the photographer, but somewhere just above and behind them, as if something has just entered the room. Each of the 17 images follows this pattern. Mundane, historical settings with small but precise deviations. A hallway that is 3 feet too long. A press conference with no microphones. A portrait where the reflection shows Nixon's head turned in the opposite direction. Most disturbing is the consistent presence of a third object or person just at the edge of frame. Always indistinct, always humanoid, never the same shape twice. In photo 4, it is a blurred arm. In photo 8, a child-sized shadow cast on a wall with no visible source. In photo 13, what appears to be the reflection of a figure standing directly behind Nixon, though in the physical layout of the room, no such space exists. By April 2022, 6 individuals had direct contact with the photographs. 2 were hospitalized. 1 took his own life. 1, a photo technician named Aaron Veitch, vanished en route to a forensic analysis lab in Quantico. His car was found abandoned on Route 522. The trunk was open. Inside was a pile of shred negatives and a photograph of Nixon giving a press conference at Andrews Air Force Base. In the image, Nixon's mouth is open, Mid-speech, the tape recorders on the press table appear melted. Autopsy reports for those who died were inconclusive. Neurological irregularities were noted in 2 cases, minor lesions in the occipital lobe, damage consistent with prolonged exposure to high-frequency light or unshielded radiation, but no source of such radiation was ever found. The victims, those who lived long enough to speak, described what they saw in identical terms. Nixon, looking not at them, but through them. We traced the origin of the photographs to a Department of Defense warehouse in Fort Meade. Records were incomplete. But one requisition order, dated July 1973, referenced Executive Monitoring Project, Phase 4, Photographic and Spectral. The signature is illegible. The recipient was listed as Special Collection Unit, RM 433B. The room no longer exists. In its place, a stairwell wall. There is no record of any Executive Monitoring Project, Phase 4, or otherwise. But declassified fragments from the Church Committee hearings mention an unsanctioned visual surveillance directive initiated in the final year of Nixon's presidency, supposedly dismantled after Watergate. No public confirmation was ever made. We interviewed former staffers. Most refused comment. One, who requested anonymity, confirmed that during the summer of 1973, Nixon underwent a series of unusual photo sessions, not by White House photographers, not by the press, by military personnel, with equipment that was not from the Pentagon, or at least not from any wing I ever worked with. The sessions were scheduled late at night. One technician reportedly resigned after the first shoot. His letter of resignation simply read, "There was something in the light." By May 2022, the photographs had entered myth. Online threads appeared. Most were disinformation, deliberate or otherwise, but a few contained details that had not been released. One image, never made public, shows Nixon seated in a steel chair, the kind used in dental surgeries. His mouth is closed, his eyes are open. Around him are 5 standing figures in surgical masks. Their faces are all turned toward him, except one, which appears to be facing the camera. When enhanced, the face resolves into a perfect copy of Nixon's own. This image was uploaded by a user known only as Gilder32, whose account was deleted 23 minutes later. The IP address traced to a server farm outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, which had burned to the ground the week prior. Electrical fire. No survivors. We began to build a profile, not of Nixon, but of the photographers. All 17 images were unsigned, but metadata embedded in the negatives reference serial designations tied to DoD Field Imaging Unit 14, a group officially disbanded in 1975. Of the original members, only one was still alive, Sergeant First Class Lionel Drexler, 84 years old, living in a VA hospital in Nebraska. When reached for comment, he responded only once. He said, "We didn't take those pictures, they took us." Drexler died 2 weeks later of a massive cerebral hemorrhage. No autopsy was performed at the family's request, but records show that in the final hours before his death, he wrote a letter. It was never sent. The contents were preserved by a nurse who found it unsent on his bedside table. It reads, "I saw him blink when no one else did. The photos aren't still, they just wait until you forget to look." By June, the case had moved underground. The photographs were officially classified, but by then, the damage was done. We had spoken with archivists, technicians, former military handlers, all off the record, all afraid. Some reported persistent hallucinations. All refused to look directly at the prints once exposed. One researcher left the field altogether after describing a recurring dream in which Nixon stands beside his own casket, whispering something to the figure lying inside. We located one more copy, the only confirmed original still in civilian hands. It was in the possession of a former government contractor turned recluse, living in rural Maine. He would only speak to us by mail. In his final letter, he included a Polaroid of the original print taped to the inside of a locked drawer. The note read, "It doesn't show up in mirrors. None of them do." He was found dead in his cabin 4 days later. The cause of death was listed as accidental exposure to cleaning solvents, but the FBI's presence at the scene was never explained. The Nixon photographs are no longer just an artifact. They are a pattern, a contagion, a form of documentation that resists its own history. Each person who encounters them brings back a slightly different version, not of Nixon, but of the context, the setting, the very memory of the man. The face remains the same. The surroundings decay, the meaning corrodes. We have confirmed, through independent analysis, that 2 of the 17 photographs do not conform to any known chemical development process. The grain does not match period stock, the exposure layers are reversed, the ink does not reflect light, it absorbs it. These are not just photographs, they are mirrors, not of the past, but of something watching the past. And every time one is seen, it shifts, slightly, subtly, toward something else, something waiting to be remembered. The man's name was Joel Rennick. At least, that's what the employee log at the White House Photography Office listed him as in the spring of 1971. A contractor, not a staffer. Hired on temporary clearance to assist with a surge in classified documentation for the President's newly formed Intelligence Evaluation Committee. No birth certificate, no social security record, no prior employment history. But his name appears on 5 visitor logs, each one signed in blue ink, each one corresponding with late-night access to the Executive Office building. He was never photographed. The only known image of Rennick is a blurry silhouette in the reflection of a window during a March 3rd shoot on the South Lawn. He's visible only in the glass, not in the primary exposure. A second man is taking the picture. Rennick is facing away. The reflection shows him looking directly at the camera. This frame, archived under code WHI71-RX, was not made public until a 1989 FOIA request from the Associated Press. It was misfiled as part of an unrelated photo set documenting the Apollo 14 landing return. When a junior researcher flagged the inconsistency, the National Archives quietly reclassified the reel as non-essential material and removed it from public access. On April 2, 1971, Rennick entered the West Wing through the Southeast Gate at 10:14 p.m. He was logged in by a Secret Service officer named Howard Tills, who noted that Rennick was carrying a tripod, a sealed black case, and a small duffel bag. Tills later testified that Rennick appeared agitated, clammy was the word used, and asked for directions not to the press room, but to the lower reception suite. No such room exists. The last person to see Rennick alive was Helen Bossier, a custodial employee working overnight rotation. In a 1993 oral history interview, she recalled hearing metallic sounds from the basement sublevel sometime after midnight. She assumed someone was repairing the air ducts. When she passed by the lower archive corridor, she saw a man standing motionless at the far end of the hallway, facing the wall. He did not respond when spoken to. She did not approach. By morning, the only evidence Rennick had ever been there was a single, unprocessed roll of Kodak Tri-X400 film left on a metal tray in the dark room adjacent to the Situation Room. The negatives were underexposed. Several were blank. One, Frame 17, was recovered and analyzed. Frame 17 shows Nixon in profile, seated at a long wooden table. The room is not the cabinet room. It is narrower, with no visible windows, and no lighting fixtures on the ceiling. The walls are lined with what appear to be filing cabinets. Nixon's mouth is open, his eyes are closed. Behind him, partially obscured by the grain of the film, is a figure standing motionless, blurred beyond identification, but unmistakably human-shaped. The figure is facing Nixon. Its right arm is lifted as if pointing. Nixon's hand is mid-air, as though responding. The image was reviewed by a panel of forensic analysts at the Library of Congress in 1995. The report was never published. One member of the panel, a photo specialist named Dorian Halperin, later told a friend that the image wasn't taken by a human perspective. When asked to explain, he reportedly said, "The focal point is behind the subject's head, as if the camera was inside him." On April 3, 1971, Joel Rennick failed to report for checkout. The Secret Service initiated an internal search. No record of his departure was found. The duffel bag, the tripod, the sealed case, all missing. The temporary clearance file associated with his ID number was deleted from federal systems the following week. The office that authorized his access, Subcommittee H-17-B, was dissolved in June of that year. Its existence is not acknowledged in any official directory. Its last known directive was a request for additional monitoring resources for high-risk executive stress testing. The phrase executive stress testing appears in only one other known government document, a May 1971 memorandum from then White House counsel John Ehrlichman to H.R. Haldeman. The memo, partially redacted, states, photographic anomalies from H17-B. I recommend immediate containment. Subject is not responding to ambient light sources. Reflection inconsistencies noted. Possible exposure to reverse index materials. Please advise on protocol for burn phase. Suggest involvement of NASA optics team if deterioration continues. NASA has denied all involvement. Over the next 3 months, 4 additional photographers assigned to Nixon's private schedule resigned unexpectedly. 1. A Navy petty officer named Thomas Greer returned his badge by mail and disappeared. The envelope included a strip of 35mm negatives burned through the center. The only surviving frame shows an interior shot of a conference room with an overturned chair and what appears to be a suit jacket laid flat across the table. The jacket has no visible seams. In July 1971, an internal memo circulated among White House medical staff. It referenced a persistent visual disturbance in the president's left field of view. The document, signed by Dr. Walter Tkach, described the president complaining of streaking, smears of shadow in the periphery, and the sensation of being photographed from inside. No diagnosis was made. A recommendation for neuroimaging was declined. A month later, Nixon stopped allowing private photography sessions outside of public appearances. All visual documentation was routed through a central processing unit installed in the basement of the EOB. No third-party development was permitted. Photographers were screened before and after every assignment. Exposure logs were maintained. Cameras were inspected. Film canisters were tagged with radiation monitors. 3 returned with anomalies in September alone. One such anomaly, dated September 8, 1971, showed what should have been an empty conference room in the White House basement. The image, frame 13B, shows a seated Nixon speaking across a table to an unidentifiable figure. The problem: no such meeting was scheduled. No staff logged entry to the room. The second figure's face is entirely blacked out, not by censorship but by absence. A void. No light, no texture, just a flat, impossible blankness. This frame was never printed, but it was digitized and stored on a secure server maintained by the Naval Photographic Center. In 2003, the server was retired. During the data migration process, frame 13B corrupted 214 other files across 7 folders. Metadata was overwritten, the system crashed. One technician later noted that the error logs contained a string of repeating text. "I remember what you see." The phrase does not correspond to any known system error. The deeper we looked into Rennick, the more absences we found. No family, no housing record, no paper trail before 1971. One archival census form from Illinois lists a Joseph Rennick, born in 1936, but the handwriting is different and the line was crossed out. A note in the margin reads, "Removed by request, not part of enumeration." No explanation is provided. An internal White House calendar dated April 1971 lists session Rennick spectral, scribbled in the margins of April 1st. The handwriting matches Nixon's own. The term spectral appears in no other known White House scheduling notes. And then there's the memo, unsigned, undated, found in a file labeled Miska Comms Eyes Only, recovered from the Nixon Presidential Library in a mislabeled drawer in 2017. Phase 2 initiated. Subject stable. Recordings show expected deviations. Imagery behaving within tolerances. Facial drift increasing under bright conditions. Memory loop beginning to fragment. Auditory overlap noted. Visual decay in progress. Begin containment protocols. Avoid mirrors. Do not expose to flash. This document has never been authenticated, but the ink matches federal stock from the early 1970s. The terminology is consistent with internal project notes, recovered from other Cold War-era psychological monitoring operations. By 1972, the problem appears to have escalated. Nixon begins to cancel more appointments. His public appearances become more controlled. One staffer reports that he requested no more footage from the west angle. "It's pulling too much." When asked what that meant, he said only, "It's not the light, it's the thing in the light." Internal correspondence between Henry Kissinger and a staff member of the Defense Intelligence Agency includes an exchange about optic bleed-through from the central node. A margin note reads, "Rennick files to be suppressed. No further documentation." Suppressed or not, the images survived. Rennick's role was intercepted, copied and distributed among a small number of photo specialists before being archived. One of these specialists, Judith Emmer, retained a degraded contact sheet in her private files. She died in 2011. The sheet was found inside a Bible, bookmarked to Revelation 1:14. The frame is almost black, but upon digital enhancement, faint outlines appear, rows of chairs, a table, and Nixon standing alone in a featureless room, both hands at his sides. There is something behind him. There always is. The last official mention of Rennick appears in a classified personnel review from October 1971. The summary is blunt. Operator compromised. Image integrity degraded. Project cannot guarantee observational stability. Terminate node. Initiate secondary record under new designation. To this day, Rennick's body has never been found. No death certificate, no grave, no legal next of kin. But he exists, at least partially, in the photographs he left behind, in the angles that do not make sense, in the reflections that do not match, in the blank spaces where something should be and is not, or perhaps where something was never supposed to be and now is. We move next to California. San Clemente, Nixon's final retreat. A photographer named Lou Dietrich was assigned to document the Western White House in 1974. What he captured during Nixon's last weeks in office has never been shown, not because it was hidden, but because, once printed, the negatives could not be looked at. Not without something looking back. Lou Dietrich was not a believer. He made that clear to me in the first sentence of our only phone conversation. "You're wasting your time," he said. "There's nothing supernatural about paranoia," and Nixon was paranoid from the jump. Dietrich had been a photojournalist embedded with naval operations in Vietnam before being recruited by the White House Photographic Office in late 1973. His clearance level was unusually high for a civilian contractor. He was assigned to Nixon's team in February 1974 with orders to document day-to-day operations at La Casa Pacifica, the president's Western White House, located in San Clemente, California. He arrived with 3 cameras, 2 assistants, and a box of undeclared equipment that was never inventoried. The box remained sealed until the day Nixon resigned. Its contents have never been verified. Dietrich said only that the gear was lent to him by a friend at Los Alamos. In his private notes, now in the possession of his niece, Dietrich records an odd instruction given during his briefing. Avoid full-body exposures in mirrored rooms. If unavoidable, underexpose by 2 stops. Never bracket exposures without verification. The house itself was unusual. Built in the 1920s, the estate was retrofitted with reinforced glass, radio-blocking insulation, and a sealed room in the basement accessible only through a dumbwaiter. Dietrich noted that Nixon spent long periods there alone, sometimes hours at a time, without staff, family, or Secret Service present. When asked about these absences, Nixon reportedly replied, "I have to let it settle." It is unclear what it was. Over the course of 6 months, Dietrich took more than 4,200 photographs. The majority were benign, meetings with advisors, beach walks, helicopter arrivals. But 36 exposures, all on the same reel, were classified immediately upon development and never publicly released. These images were processed not in Washington but in a secure facility at El Toro Marine Corps Air Station. Only one technician handled the negatives. His name was Corporal Alan Reyes. Within a week of developing the reel, Reyes was placed on involuntary psychiatric leave and committed to a military hospital in Nevada. His discharge report states, acute hallucinatory episodes, describes experiencing visual recursion, claims he can see himself being watched from within developed photographs. Diagnosis, non-organic psychosis, recommended indefinite hold. The negatives were boxed and sealed. Officially, they no longer exist. Unofficially, Dietrich kept copies. In 1987, following a stroke, Dietrich attempted to contact the Library of Congress to arrange a private transfer. He claimed to possess visual documentation of NIN states not possible under known biology. The library declined. Dietrich never made a second attempt. The copies remained in a fireproof cabinet in his garage until his death in 2002. His niece, Erika Dietrich, inherited the house. In 2009, she opened the cabinet. Inside were 5 envelopes. 4 contained standard 8x10 glossies, many familiar, many not. The 5th held a single negative, developed but not mounted. No markings, no date. A handwritten note attached with tape read, "Don't look in the background." We had it scanned. The image shows Nixon seated in a wicker chair in the La Casa Pacifica living room. His hands are relaxed, his tie is slightly askew. Sunlight enters from the left through the arched windows. At first glance, nothing seems unusual. Then the eye adjusts. Behind Nixon, on the far side of the room, is a floor-length mirror. In the reflection, Nixon is still seated, but his expression has changed. His face is turned sharply toward the camera, toward the photographer. His mouth is open, his eyes are wide, and standing directly behind his reflection is a second figure. No detail is visible. It appears as a silhouette, humanoid, taller than Nixon by nearly a foot. Its head is tilted, its arm is reaching forward. The hand appears to rest on Nixon's reflected shoulder. In the original frame, no one is behind him. Dietrich never explained this photo, but he referenced it obliquely in an undated journal entry discovered in a locked drawer. "I took the photo. I didn't press the shutter." In April 1974, Dietrich was instructed to photograph Nixon alone in the sealed basement room. The assignment was unusual. No staff were present. The room, according to architectural diagrams, had no lighting fixtures and no ventilation. Dietrich was instructed to enter at 10 p.m., take 3 photographs, and leave immediately. He was not to speak. He was not to ask questions. He later told his niece that the room was colder than the rest of the house by at least 10 degrees. He described a smell like static electricity, and he said Nixon was already seated facing the far wall, whispering something in a language Dietrich did not recognize. He took 2 photographs. When he prepared for the third, the shutter jammed. The sound, according to his own notes, caused Nixon to stand abruptly and turn. Dietrich described the president's expression as void, not angry, not startled, but utterly absent of human recognition. Then Nixon walked toward him, stopped inches from the lens, and said, "You've already taken it. It's just waiting to be seen." Dietrich left immediately. The third photo was recovered weeks later. Somehow the shutter had fired. The image was underexposed, but enhancements show Nixon mid-step, 1 foot off the ground, mouth open and eyes pitch black. Not red from reflection, black. The iris, the whites, gone. Behind him in the corner of the room, something is visible, a kind of bulge in the darkness, the suggestion of another figure, or a distortion in the image. The exact form is impossible to determine. Dietrich's log reads only, background degraded, exposure pulled inward. Whatever was behind him, I don't think it stayed behind him. On August 9, 1974, Nixon resigned. Dietrich was on site during the final hours. He took no photographs. He later wrote that Nixon refused to be documented on his last day. He told me the film couldn't hold him anymore, that the edges were softening. That phrase, edges softening, appears again, this time in a 1975 memo from the Defense Technical Information Center. The document references a classified program titled Spectre. The project summary is heavily redacted, but one segment reads, "Subject exhibits signs of boundary bleed. Imagery fails to resolve under standard wavelengths. Photographs show divergence beyond silver halide capacity. Recommend magnetic isolation. Terminate exposure loop." There is no known photographic medium called an exposure loop, but in another recovered letter, sent from Dietrich to a former Navy contact, he writes, "They're not pictures, not anymore. They're imprints. Like sound caught in a room long after it's gone. But instead of echoing, they look back." In 1991, an anonymous donation was made to the San Diego Museum of Photography, a sealed box containing 29 photographs, all labeled San Clemente, 1974. Museum staff began cataloging the images but halted within a week. The collection was quietly removed from archives. Internal emails describe image warping, directional distortion, and viewer-induced nausea. One staff member, Marta Higgins, later stated during a private interview that she began seeing Nixon's face in reflections, car windows, store glass, even inside a spoon. "Not his normal face," she said. "The other one, the one that knows it's being watched." She left her position that year. The images from the San Clemente series remain officially unviewed, but a partial contact sheet was leaked online in 2018. It showed only one clear image, Nixon on the beach, facing the ocean, arms extended slightly at his sides. Behind him, the waves appear frozen, not in motion blur, but literally stopped, as if time had halted at the moment of exposure. Sea spray hangs in midair, A gull hovers without wings blurred. The photo is impossibly sharp. Too sharp. Forensic analysts later noted that depth of field in the image exceeds what is optically possible at the aperture listed on the camera used. The photo was removed from all platforms within 48 hours. No explanation was ever offered. Lou Dietrich's final note, scrawled on the back of a receipt and found taped to the inside of the fireproof cabinet, reads, "They're not pictures of him. They're pictures of what had to happen so he could stay him. That's what they caught. That's why they can't be forgotten." As we traced the chain of ownership of the photographs, a disturbing pattern emerged. Everyone who handled the images for more than 72 hours reported visual disturbances, peripheral motion, flickers, a sense of being watched. For many, the symptoms faded once the images were removed, but for others, the effects remained. One archivist developed persistent tinnitus, a high whine she described as like a camera flash charging, only it never fires. She died by suicide in 2015. In Part 4, we return to the East Coast, to a storage facility in Arlington, where the Library of Congress kept an undocumented for nearly 30 years. The reel was never scheduled, never requested, and never developed, until it was, by accident. And what it showed may not be from this world, or any known camera. It may not even be from this timeline. The reel was never logged. It was found in 2006 during a routine audit of accession number 74-2C at the Library of Congress Packard campus for audio-visual conservation, located in Culpeper, Virginia. The facility, designed to store hundreds of thousands of film reels, discs, and photographs under strict temperature and humidity controls, occasionally unearths unregistered materials during audits. Most are misfiled newsreels, duplicates, or unlabeled radio broadcasts. This one was different. A junior archivist, Ronald Spar, was sorting nitrate film when he opened a plain steel canister marked only with a white sticker, EOB 8-15-74 Alt. The date suggested August 15, 1974, 6 days after Nixon's resignation. The reel was 16 millimeters, tightly wound, no edge codes, no sprocket wear, and no documentation. Spar assumed it was mislabeled or a duplicate. He filed a digitization request. The technician who processed the film, Daniel Norick, quit his position the following day. He left a single line in his resignation email. "I didn't press play. It started on its own. We obtained a copy of the reel, or what remains of it. Most of the footage has since been scrubbed from institutional servers. But a forensic recovery team working with former NARA employees salvaged fragments from a drive labeled Test Burn Loop 3. The video is degraded, static overlays, audio corruption, frame skips, but what's visible has been reviewed by multiple independent analysts. None can explain it. The footage begins with 10 seconds of black screen. No countdown, no reference tone. Then a single frame, a dimly lit hallway, concrete walls, institutional gray, no identifying signage. The floor is wet as though recently cleaned or flooded. A shadow flickers across the far wall, unshaped, cast by any visible source. Then the image cuts. Next, the camera is stationary. A man, Nixon, sits in a high-backed chair, head down, breathing audibly. His hair is damp. The skin along his forehead appears darker than the rest of his face, not bruised but somehow shadowed. A low tone plays in the background, barely audible. Analysts describe it as a sine wave hovering around 417 Hz, not a frequency associated with film equipment. The camera zooms slightly. Nixon looks up, and then the frame ruptures. There is no other word. The picture breaks along a horizontal axis, not a normal tape glitch or chemical artifact, but a clean, sudden dividing line. The top half remains fixed. The bottom half tilts slowly, unnaturally, until it aligns vertically. The image in that portion becomes independent, moving at a different pace with different lighting. In the top half, Nixon's face is still. In the bottom, he is speaking. No audio is heard. His mouth opens and closes in short, clipped movements. He appears to repeat one phrase. Lip readers have disagreed on interpretation. The most consistent rendering, "You are not filming, you are becoming." The image stutters. For 11 seconds, the screen shows only one frame. Repeated, Nixon facing the lens directly. His eyes are wide open. His pupils are fully dilated. The shadows behind him begin to ripple. Then, without transition, the camera is handheld. Shaky, running. The footage now moves through a narrow corridor. The walls are the same gray concrete. There is no audio. Occasionally, a reflection appears in the polished surface of a window, but it's always distorted. At 1:46, a reflection shows Nixon again. He is not present in the hallway, but in the reflection, he appears to be moving, slow, deliberate steps, always just behind the lens. There is no source for the light in these sequences. At 2:08, the camera pans left. A room, wide, circular, with walls covered in what appears to be soundproofing foam. At the center, a steel table. On it, 17 photographs arranged in a circle. The prints are identical. Nixon seated in different locations, each photo showing a slightly different posture. One hand raised, one hand lowered. One in which the face is entirely up, but the chemical result of overexposure to light from within the camera. The pattern left behind resembles an eye. The reel ends. All attempts to play the footage again, whether digitally or through analog projection, have failed. Either the footage loops endlessly at the hallway frame, or the screen remains black. On one attempt, the image reportedly displayed a live timestamp, 08:15:74, 11:43 p.m. This was 31 years to the minute after Nixon's recorded time of resignation from the presidency. No further metadata was retrieved. No cameras were found in use at the executive office building at that time. No logs indicate filming occurred. And yet there is a tape. Spar, the archivist who found it, was interviewed in 2010. He appeared on a podcast about government film anomalies. In that interview, he said, "It didn't look like he was acting. It looked like he was waiting." When asked what he meant, he clarified, "The Nixon on the film, he wasn't doing anything. But the air around him, it was like it knew someone was watching. Like it was shaping him as you looked." He died in 2011. Blunt force trauma, according to the coroner. He was found in his home, alone. The mirrors in every room had been covered. In 2014, a FOIA request for all audiovisual material associated with Nixon from July through September 1974 was denied in full. The reason? National security concerns related to ongoing interpretive instability. The phrase interpretive instability does not appear in any other federal records, except one, a CIA technical review memo from 1976, evaluating the psychological effects of repeated exposure to image sequences derived from nonlinear data capture. The memo references mirror exposure complications, feedback recursion, and mimetic saturation patterns. All sections citing Nixon directly are redacted. The memo concludes, the image ceases to reflect the subject. It begins to reflect the viewer. This has been our growing concern. Every person who interacts with these materials brings back something slightly different, not just emotionally but physically. Digital frames show pixel divergence. Print photographs display chemical abnormalities localized not to the photo, but to the gaze of the viewer. One test subject viewed a high-resolution scan of the hallway frame from the reel. After 90 seconds, he began describing movement within the image. When told the frame was still, he said, "No, not the frame. Him." The subject later reported dreaming of corridors, endless sterile corridors lined with doors. All the doors were locked behind each, he said. Nixon waited, but not our Nixon. One more clue surfaced in 2020. A former Pentagon contractor, name withheld at the family's request, left behind a series of handwritten notebooks. In them, he details a program called Sensor Veil, allegedly a late-stage psychological defense protocol initiated during Nixon's final days in office. The notes are largely incoherent, but one entry stands out. He left office, but the office didn't let go. They tried to record the departure. What they got was the echo, and the echo looked back. He refers repeatedly to image anchors and observer locks. In one diagram, a loop connects an image of Nixon to a silhouette labeled photographer. The loop is annotated: subject, recorder, witness, subject. We have come to understand that the photographs do not just record a moment, they alter it. They contain Nixon, yes, but not just the man. The office, the burden, the thing that pressed against reality to make him real. When he left, something had to remain, and it did. Our next installment will bring us to the source, the earliest image known to display the anomaly, a candid photograph taken in 1950, long before Nixon was president, before Watergate, before the paranoia. The photo was taken by a family friend during a barbecue, but something in the background doesn't belong. The figure hadn't arrived yet, but it was already there.
Understood. Here is part 5 of the macabre history of the Nixon photographs. Each image took something from the photographer, presented in a single, uninterrupted narration. The earliest known image was not archived. It was not cataloged, classified, or protected. It sat in a family photo album for over 60 years, unnoticed, unexamined, until the granddaughter of Helen Cartwright posted it to a genealogy forum in March 2021, asking if anyone could identify the model of car in the background. The image was taken in Whittier, California in July 1950. The location was a backyard. The occasion, a summer barbecue. The subject, Richard Nixon, then 37 years old, recently elected to the U.S. Senate. He is wearing a white shirt, rolled sleeves, smiling, a paper plate in one hand. Behind him, a folding table, a girl in a dress, a neighbor. And to the right, in the background, behind the chain-link fence, something else. The original scan is low resolution, but even at that level, it's visible. A figure, partially obscured by a hedge, standing motionless, facing the camera. It is not a neighbor. It is not a guest. No one in the family remembers anyone standing there. The space is a narrow utility easement between two properties, not easily accessible. The figure is tall, with dark clothes and indistinct features. The shape of the head is wrong, either elongated or caught mid-motion in a blur that does not match the exposure. The hands appear to hang too low, and the shadow it casts falls in a direction inconsistent with all others in the image. Cartwright's granddaughter posted the image for automotive identification. What she got instead were comments asking about the figure. One user enhanced the contrast and isolated the region. When rebalanced, the facial features emerged. Nixon's, but younger. Wrong. The eyes were closed, the mouth was open, and the teeth, too many, too small. The original print was mailed to a photographic historian in Sacramento. He reported a double emulsion pattern inconsistent with consumer-grade film. The background around the figure registers at a subtly different grain scale. He noted that the figure did not appear to cast any blur. He wrote, "It's not a photograph of something there, it's a record of something arriving." Days after receiving the print, he suffered a seizure while presenting unrelated materials to a university class. In the moments before collapsing, according to eyewitnesses, he had been describing a phenomenon known as secondary visual intrusion, where an image continues to display new information after it has been developed. The photograph was collected by a man claiming to represent a federal archive initiative. No such program exists. The print has not resurfaced. However, in the hours before his collapse, the historian sent one final email to a colleague. Attached was a cropped scan of the figure's face. The file name, firstsighting.tiff. The timestamp on the image metadata is earlier than the known scanning session. It is dated February 9, 1950, 5 months before the photo was taken. The question of how that timestamp exists remains unanswered. We followed the trail further, to the original photographer. According to family records, the image was taken by James Cartwright, Helen's husband. He was an amateur shutterbug, known for documenting family events. His negatives were stored in a metal box in the attic, untouched since his death in 1976. Of the 73 rolls recovered, all but one contained standard family snapshots. The exception was roll 28. Unmarked, loosely wound, and partially degraded. Its first 12 frames were blank. The rest were identical. The side of the Cartwright house at night, shot from the alleyway, framed tightly to show only the lit windows. Each image is slightly different in exposure. In the final frame, a face is visible in the window. Not Helen's, not James's. It is Nixon's face, again, unmistakable but altered. The eyes are wrong. The expression is static, as though caught in a repeated loop. This roll was never shown to the family. No one remembered taking it. No corresponding memory exists. The Cartwright house burned down in 2019 under unexplained circumstances. No foul play was determined, but the attic was the origin point. The deeper we looked, the more pre-presidency images surfaced. Yearbook group photos, civic events, newspaper clippings, in each, anomalies, figures in background windows, reflections in glass, not always Nixon, but always related, always staring, always just off the expected axis. The theory that emerged is not linear. It does not suggest that the photographs caused anything, nor that Nixon was possessed, influenced, or haunted. Rather, that from the beginning, From well before his political career, there was a presence building itself in the photographic record. Not a being, not a person, a structure, a scaffold made of image, exposure, observer. Each photograph added weight to it. Each new image pulled the framework into sharper focus. Nixon was not the source. He was the medium. There is one final image, not an official photograph, not a candid. It is a photocopy of a security camera still from the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, dated March 10, 1994, the night of a fire alarm malfunction that resulted in a brief loss of power to the Special Media Division. The camera is positioned above a stairwell. The hallway is dark. At the center of the frame is a man walking away from the lens. The timestamp reads 02:46 a.m. The figure wears a suit. The right shoulder slopes downward, one arm swings too low, the hairline is familiar, the ears are wrong, slightly too small. Zoomed enhancement shows one shoe is untied. The security badge clipped to the lapel is blank. The figure walks toward a storage room, later found to have been opened. Inside, original contact prints from the San Clemente photographs. 5 missing, no forced entry, no witnesses. Nixon had been dead for 75 days. The final frame, recovered from the copier memory, shows a different angle. A still of the stairwell, now empty. On the wall, in shadow, a shape lingers. Not a person, not a face, a residue. Some refer to this as an image ghost, a phenomenon where prior exposures can persist on sensitive film, even without contact. But this shape did not match any known prior footage. And the grain of the shadow was not photographic, it was retinal. It was shaped by what the photographer saw. In the final analysis, we are left with this. The Nixon photographs are not just documents. They are parts of a recursive structure, a loop in which the act of witnessing contributes to the creation of the thing being seen. The photographs do not show what was. They show what was required to believe that it was. And that requirement has mass. It has presence. It remains. There is no final photograph, no ultimate frame. Every attempt to close the sequence results in one more exposure, one more image. The observers become the content, the record continues. The thing being seen grows more stable each time we try to explain it. Nixon was a man. That is fact. What we see in the photographs is not him, but it needed him, it used him, it arranged itself into him, and now it waits, not to be looked at, to look.